Welcome to the fastest daf in town. Today we'll start the Zevachim Daf Chav Gimel. We're going to begin on Chav Gimel Amud Aleph, about 10 lines from the top, by the dot Meisvei, asking the question. So we're learning about the Zikni Darim, that they said an interesting concept, that when it comes to someone who's Tamei Mace, they end up holding that Mishalech Karbanaisav. B'diavad, they can actually bring their carbon. Now, this is, as we saw, psukim, which seem to go against this, because part of eating the carbon pesach, you would think, you obviously know you have to be tahor. You can't eat the carbon pesach if you're tamei. So how is it shaykh that this person could have the carbon brought on his behalf? So the answer is that when it comes to the achila, that's only la mitzvah. However, it's not ma'akev. So we ended up bringing on the next Amud on Chav Gimel Aleph. We said, well, what do you mean? There's a hekesh that just like when you do the carbon pesach, you have to know how many people are there. You also, we make a hekesh that you also need to have people who are fit to eat, and therefore achil is ma'akev. That's why Rashi said, Shim shachtu l'tameim she'en yicholim l'achol kazayis posel. V'afil hein menuyin. Even if they're counted, but it doesn't matter. If they're not able to eat it, they're not able to eat it. So, based on that hekesh, it's a problem. So he said, no, the Zikni Darim don't learn of that hekesh, and therefore it's not an issue. And then we ended up asking another pirchon. We ended up with remaining with a kasha as to seemingly it shouldn't work. So now the Gemara continues. Meisvei, we have another question posed to the Zikni Darim. Nimnei she'amru nozir v'oisa pesach. When because this is brought down in a Mishnah in Masechtas Psachim, that regarding the din of a nazir as well as someone who brings the carbon pesach, it says how sitz maratza al tumas dam, then sitz maratza al tumas aguf. So there's a distinction, even though when the Kohen Gadol is wearing the tzitz, the golden headplant, nonetheless, even though it does achieve a certain level of forgiveness or kapara, that's only regarding to tumas dam, namely the blood of the carbon itself. Namely, if let's say the blood becomes tamei, so then the carbon is accepted. However, not if the person is tamei. So we see clearly, apparently, as we're going to see, Rashi points out, we're talking about the person is tamei, right? Which again seems to be against what we've been saying, what the Zikni Darim hold. That's why it gives those examples. The ilu shar karbano, says Rashi, in tumas baal and poiselos behen. So tumas baal doesn't passel anything. Apparently, as we said, well, not according to again, but apparently the carbon pesach, not being able to eat it is ma'akev. V'nozer nami kishenitma b'meis. We know, and we learned at great length, Masechtas Nazir, that he has to be tahor. And if, let's say, he became Tamei Mace, Shesaser Nazirusa, the Sarach Lachsav Limnois, he has to do a whole count over again, because he did not remain tahor as he was supposed to. Being a Nazir, part of it is he can't become Tamei Mace. Rashi says, Ve'in royal karbanos tegalachto ad sheyatahir. He's not allowed to bring these karbanos, and part of the process is the shaving until he's tahor. V'yavi tchila karbanos naziros tumasai shtei turim. So Rashi, for whatever reason, describes this and says, in order to become able to remove yourself of the nazirus, first you have to remove yourself of the tuma, which is the din of someone who's a nazir who's tamei has to bring 2 turtle doves, the ashim, and a guilt offering. V'yimnas naziros, and he counts over his naziros. V'yachach yavi karbanos naziros tahara. Then he has to bring another set. V'gatani ain't sitz maratza b'diavad. So we see clearly that it's not. It says it's not maratza. So on this, the Gemara asks, "B'mai, what are we talking about? Elam b'tuma sheretz. What tuma are we talking about when it says tumas aguf? Did this person become tamei because he came in contact with a sheretz, and that's the problem?" Koloimer says Rashi, Im Sholach Karbonoi. Okay, let's slow down. Let's go back to the Gemara. Ha'amrit Shaykh Lemazarkin al Tumas Sheretz. We already hold that you are allowed to do the Shechita when it comes to Tumas Sheretz. That's not an issue. So obviously we're not talking about that because we poskin that that's not the case. That that you could shecht and do zerikas adam even though the person is tumas sheretz. Ella tumas mace. Basically, what happened was for the carbon pesach he was tamei mace, and he won't be tahar by the 15th. He won't be tahar by the beginning of Pesach. The Gatani ain't it sits maratza, and it says that this person, presumably is tumas mace, the tzitz will not help him. Alma nitmu bal b'mace, which is mashma clearly that in the event that a person becomes tummy mace, ein mishalch and karban osayin. So it seems clearly against what the zikni darim hold. So no, that's not what it's talking about, because really the zikni darim will remain steadfast in that when it comes to tumas mace, the din is that mishalchin b'karban osayin. So id itmu balam b'meis hachinami. So in the event that the person was tamei mace hachinami, says Rashi, the maratza tzitz. The tzitz is not just maratza for the carbon if the dam became tamei, but also for someone who's a tamei mace. Hachma'askin kagayin shenitma koyin b'sheretz. We're talking about where the koyin himself became tamei by coming in contact with the sheretz, and that is where the tzitz will not be maratza. That's what it's talking about. We're not talking about the baal, because you're right. When it comes to the person himself, we paskin that shach nozarkan al tumas sheretz, but we're not talking about the baal is tamei tumas sheretz. We're talking about the koyin is tamei. Says Rashi Kiditnan tamei Posel v'okimno b'sheretz. The Tanan Nozir v'Yosef Pesach v'huadin l'chol karbanos yachid. Okay, fine. So Yehachi, if that's what we're talking about, same as Seifa. It doesn't fit into the Seifa. It says Nitma tumas hatahoim. Let's say a person has this tumah called tumas hatahoim, which again there's discussion when the tumah is revealed as opposed to it being like under the water, and there's different halachos pertaining to it. Hatzitz maratza. So when it comes to the tumas tahoim, that itaka is maratza. So hatani Rav Chia lo amr tumas tahoim elo meis bavad. Whenever we talk about tumas tahom, this concept of tumah, which is discussed at great length elsewhere, this is specifically by tumas mace. That's the only time this heter applying of tumas tahoim is only we're talking about by a mace. So a mace limute mai. What's that come to exclude? Lav limute tumas tahoim desheretz. It's telling you that the whole din of tumas tahoim is only by mace, but it's not talking about a sheretz. So therefore, obviously, this is not talking about a case of sheretz. Where it says, "Lo, limute tumas tahoim deziva." Really, it is talking about a case of a sheretz. And when it says the din of tumas tahoim, that the tzitzis maratza is not coming to exclude the case of a sheretz, but rather it's coming to exclude zav. So let's look at Rashi. My lav limute tumas tahoim de sheretz delo hutra ve'umekavachayim lo asya shein done kavachayim mahalacha. Okay. So here's a key Rashi. Rashi says it's actually talking about the tuhumas tahoim of a zav, that we do not say that the tzitzis maratza. Going Rabbi Nishmashus. So let's say you have someone who is a zav, so he had these emissions, and then he saw during this twilight time, savik kula min hayoim, o kula min halayla, the inkan ella ria achas. So he's not sure whether it was day or night, because during Ben Ishmashis it's a suffix. It's suffix yom, suffix laila. Suffix chetzi min hayoim, v'chetzi min halayla, and therefore it's not only is it possible that the re'iyah was during the day or at night. It could be half was the day, half was the night. And therefore, if it was half and half, maybe it's not like one, it's like two. The zav matame biyomim of re'os, because a zav can become tame by days and by sightings. V'hach tumas hatahoim who, so this is considered to be a tumas tahoim. The memayit mishum the chamira the yaitza ola megufo. Because it's something which came from his body, so that's why we're more chomer when it comes to this, that the tzitz will not be maratza. But that's also considered to be a form of tumas tahoim, but again, that's coming excluding, because again, we're more machmer when it comes to a tumah that comes from the body, as opposed to tumas mace or even tumas sheretz. Question number 1. Hasitz maratza al tumas dam, v'lo al tumas haguf. So, which of course we asked as a kasha, because it sounds like then this is talking about tumas mace. So my memayit tana liba the tani darim the sheichlim azarkan al tami sheretz or tami mace. So he said it's actually coming to exclude a kohen who is tami sheretz. Umaman l'shitasam tana niyarmel lo amar tumas atahim el mace movad is tumas zav. Let's see what he writes. Might tumas the kohen b'sheretz. Well, meis bovad might tumas hatahim deziva. Okay, let's keep on moving. Again, these are two, as we saw in question 3, which is just worthwhile seeing. Question TA3. Elu shnei chidushim chichu zikni daram linin tame meis bekarbon. So they have 2 kulas. One is a kohen tame mace. It's maratza. But we're focusing on the second, is balim tamei mesim enum ma'akev b'pesach b'diavad. That even if they're tamei mace, it's actually not ma'akev, because again, they don't need to eat it and everything. That's a huge chiddush. And again, the other one, which we're not focusing so much, is a kohen who is tamei mace. It's also can be maratza. Okay. All right. Let's keep on moving. Rabbi Barchama asked a question also in Psachim, in Parak Ketzad Sayilin. He said the following: Koyin hamaratze b'karbonos, when it comes to a koyin in which these karbonos are accepted, for example, as we talked about a nazir or someone who brought a carbon pesach, hutu lo tumas hatahoim o lo hutu lo tumas hatahoim. So if, let's say, as Rashi says, im nitma ba, so is it considered to be mutter b'tumas tahoim? So tivshit, we should answer the tumas hatahoim hutter uloi. That certainly should be okay. We already established that what was the problem over here. We're talking about a situation where it was the kayin was tamei tumas sheretz, and that was the problem, that it wasn't maratza. But everything else is maratza, right? The Rabbi Barchama. So therefore, we should clearly see that a kayin is maratza b'karbonos. So so apparently it is good, because we just established that it's not talking about this kayin or tumas sheretz. It's talking only that tumas tahayim of ziva is not maratza, but this case of tumas tahayim of a kayin of tumas sheretz is maratza. So according to him, it's a davar pasha. We should be able to answer this question. You're right. So the Rambam Barchama vadi pligi. So basically, he's saying is that even though it's true, Rabbi Barchama posed the question, obviously he disagrees with it, right? On the zikni daram. Says Rashi. First of all, let's see the Rashi before the L'reisha Tani in hatzitz maratza lo al tumas haguf v'lo Tani nitz. Nitma tumas tahayim hariz maratza. We said that when it comes to tumas tahayim, it is maratza. So obviously he disagrees on the zikni daraim. Says Rashi, who moikim lahiba tumas balim, because he actually said no, it's talking about tumas balim, and therefore mamish is a problem. Whose sphere the ein yachid tamei meis mishach karbonosav the achilus psachim akev. According to him, he says no, an individual. And that's the whole purpose of Pesach Sheni. This is how he understands it. Is if you're tamei, as obviously we're not talking about a tzibor, because if the roiv is tameh by carbon pesach, then you actually we say tumah to b'sibura, and it can be brought in pesach rishon. But when it's a yachid who's tameh, so that's the whole purpose of pesach sheni. Pesach sheni, the whole reason why it was originally asked to Moshe Rabbeinu was because there were people who were tameh meis, and we came up with pesach sheni because of that. So apparently that should continue. But again, b'di'eved, we're talking about b'di'eved, the Zikni Darim hold that a yachid who's tameh meis, he could still bring a carbon pesach because he doesn't have to eat the carbon pesach. However, according to the Rabbi Bar Chama, he disagrees. Okay, let's continue. So again, according to him, there's no question. He argues. Tashma. So the pasuk says, and let's see it in its entirety. V'hayal mesach aharon, that the tzitz should be on the forehead of Aaron, the Kohen Gadol, and it says v'nos Aaron es avoin hakadashim. He'll uplift the sins of whatever the people have, and the pasuk continues that the tzitz should be a mitzchay tamid l'ratzayin. It should always be on his head. So, what do we interpret this? We're asked v'chi eza avoin naisa. It says that somehow the tzitz is going to uplift some type of avera that took place. Now, what exactly is that referring to as we continue to Chaf Gimel base? So, im avon pigul, maybe it's telling you that if a person had a machshavas pigul, this improper machshava which we've been learning about previously, so then the carbon will be maratza. Now, hari kavar nemar liyachashev. So the pasuk says liyachashev, and says Rashi v'hachi kamer eza psul carbon maratzahu. What psul of a carbon is maratza? So imavon pigul, if let's say the machshav is chutzlim kaimai, that your machshav is I'm gonna do the zrika outside of the proper place, which is called pigul, as Rashi says. Pigul hu lo yiratza im enul inin chutz lezmanai to inin chutzlim kaimai. So hari kvar nemra lo yiratza. It says it's not accepted. So im avon noiser, let's say the avoin of leaving the psul, Rashi psul machshavas noiser. It's not even leaving it over, but having a machshava. They're going to leave it over. Shechishev oichlo acher shenasa noiser. You're going to eat it after noiser. Dainu machshavas chutz l'zmanoi. So in other words, one pasuk is chutz l'mkaimoi, because of the Indian, because we already have this for chutz l'zmanoi. The other one's chutz l'mkaimoi. So basically both forms of pigul. So that can't be what it's talking about, because hari kfar nemrli yaratza. It already says it's not accepted. So ha'enu naisa avan el avan tumas el tuma shahuta mechlol b'tzibor. It's probably talking about a tuma in which sometime is allowed, that sometimes we're lenient, and we allow, even though typically we won't allow it, sometimes we will. So what is that referring to? It's referring to my tuma. So what that must be referring to being tameh, because we know there's a concept of tuma b'tzibura. All these other things we don't make exceptions for, but when it comes to tuma, we will be lenient, and that's what the tzitz is maratza for. Now, so my tuma. So what tuma are we talking about? Maybe the tzitz is maratza for the sheretz of a person's tummy sheretz, as Rashi says. Matukma b'koyin, either the kohen is tameh, or b'bailim, or the baal is tameh sheretz. Remember the high the sheikh of Azarek al tameh sheretz, tzitz hu maratza. If a person does shchita zrika, which we say you're allowed to, but the tzitz hu maratza for that. So hecha ishtari. Where do we find that it's mutter b'tzibor? Says Rashi, kivan de'ein yachid nidche. When a person who is tameh sheretz himself, it's not nidche. So tzibor lo abdi b'tuma. So therefore, he can't do it. The tzibor also can't. So hechish tari el tumas mace. We're talking about a case of tumas mace that, under certain circumstances, we're lenient and we allow it by tumas mace. V'lav kigoyin shenit mubayilun b'mace. We're talking probably where the baal is the one who is tameh mace, and we still see the sitz, and we see the sitz as maratza. So alma nitmu baal b'meis mishalchin karbonosayan. It must be the fact that the tzitz is maratza. Therefore, b'di'eved, of course, is al chachila. But if you're tummy, you can bring the carbon. So v'mai. Even Nazir, maybe we're talking about a person who is a Nazir. The Yomus Mace Alavam Rachmana. The pasuk already talks about this, as Rashi says. The tummy roish nizru b'saiser. We know that it's not just simply maratz and everything is fine, because a Nazir who's tummy, we say he's saiser his nazirus, as we said before. The in royal karbanos tahara. And Rashi seems to repeat this, that this person who's a Nazir Tameh, he can't just bring his karbanos tahar, ashiyavri me tuma. He has to first remove his tuma, viavi kaparas tumas nazirosov, and again, for some reason it says, shtei toyrim, he has to bring the 2 turtle doves, v'asham, v'yivdam v'yasham, v'yavar karbanosas tigalachtai. So when it comes to Nazirus, we don't say, oh, the sitz is maratz, and therefore you can just bring your Nazirus Batahara while you're Tameh. No, we know that's not true. There's a whole process before that. So therefore, El Oisa Pesach, right? And what do we see? We see that seemingly like like we just established before, that this is like the Zikni Darim. The Zikni Darim seem to be right. And this is actually Kasha then, as Rashi points out, on Rami Bar Chama, that a tummy mace mishalech pischai, that you can bring the carbon Pesach. Again, this is obviously not lachatchila, but you don't have to eat it. So let's see the parentheses. So we're saying no. Maybe we're talking about that the tzitz is actually maratza, the person who is tummy sheretz. Now, the question is, we don't find any heter over there before normally, right? So we said no v'shem tuma ba'oilum. We're just mentioning the concept of tuma. Says Rashi, ashkan dishtari behen. In general, there is a concept sometimes that when it comes to dinim of tuma, we're lenient of tuma hutah b'tzibur. Maybe not by a case of a sheretz, but nonetheless, it is teaching us that the tzitz is maratza for tumas sheretz, maybe not for tumas mace. And some people actually make a diuk based on the psukim in order to support Rami Bar Chama that it's not talking about tumas mace, because the pasuk says avan hakadashim. So what does that mean? Avan hakadashim in avan hakadashim avan makdishin loy. So what does that mean? So avain makdishim mean with the people, which is a tumas aguf, ben the kohanim, ben the balim, lo maratza. So maybe it's not coming to tell us that you're maratza. It's only the oven hakadoshim, but not the oven makdishim. So again, that's the reason why they actually learn that it's talking about the carbon itself. That let's say the dam of the carbon becomes tummy, so that sits as maratza, but because that's the oven hakadoshim of the carbon, but not the makdishim, the people who bring the carbon. So a tumas aguf doesn't matter if the kohen's tummy or the baal, it will not be maratza. Therefore, it's some level of a diuk to support Rami Bar Chama that when it comes to tumas mace, which is like a tumas aguf, that we do not say that he could bring the carbon pesach betuma. So that's his diak. So as oven kadoshim in oven makdishim lo my tuma. So what tuma? Ilema tuma sheretz mishtari b'tzibor elav tumas mace. So we say maybe it's tumas mace. The oven kadoshim in oven makdishim lo, right? So it's talking to exclude dafka the tumas mace. There's no din of being maratza for the sheretz. Lo oilam tumas sheretz. The shem tumah ba'oilam, as we said. Okay, now let's continue. Actually, let's slow down maybe. Let's maybe see another question if there's another one here. Not by TA, TB. Nope. Okay, let's keep going. Okay, so the Mishnah, all the way to the beginning of the parak, told us that certain things that a person does improperly will make the avoda completely puzzle. So this is kol zvach shekibul daman. This is all the way in Tes Vav of Beis, a decent amount of blot before. And we talked about a zar, non-Kohen does the avoda, an oinein, a tvul yoim, mechusar kippurim, mechusar begadim. Someone who didn't wash the daim or gline. That's when we talked a lot about the kior, the laver, an oral, even though it wasn't his fault because his brothers died because of Mila. Someone who's tameh, which was what we were just talking about. Now a yoshev, someone who's sitting down, or let's just see the rest of the Mishnah. Oimen al gabi kalim, al gabi behemo, al gabi ragli chaveru is possible. Okay, and let's just finish the Mishnah. And if you're makabel b'smoil, it's possible. However, Rav Shimon's machsher. So by right or lefty, not right or lefty, but right or left hand is machlokas. Okay. So Manon, how do we know you're not allowed to be sitting while doing the avodah, and that it will actually passel the avodah? So Omer Rav Nachman Omer Kra, because the pasuk says B'sharis b'shem Hashem Elokav Gechol Elchav Olavim Ha'oimdim Shom Lifnei Hashem. It says that they're standing to serve when they're serving Hashem. Right? Ki voy bach Hashem Lekach Mikol Shabbat Amoid L'sharis b'shem Hashem. So again, it says that they were standing. So therefore, Lamida Bachartiv V'lo Shiva. I've only allowed you basically to do it standing and not sitting. And Rashi says, Hivan Delo Nivchru, since you weren't chosen to do this while sitting, Haviluhu Zarim, V'zar Machal Avoida. So this is similar to what we said, like by a Mechusar Begadim, a kohen who doesn't wear the proper garments is like a zar. He's like a non-kohen. And we know a non-kohen, as we saw before, is Machal Avoida. The avoda is puzzle. So too, someone's in yeshiva. Turn about. Pasuk says, Lamad l'shares mitzvah. It's a mitzvah to stand. So kashu oimer ha'oimdim, but it also says ha'oimdim, so shana levakosel v'akev. So in other words, we actually have two psukim. So the fact that it's repeated is not just a good idea or nice or chatchila, but it's mamash ma'akev if he doesn't. Armele Ravu Rav Nachman Michni Yoshev Kazardami. So what do we say? The person sitting is like a non-kohen. Umachal avoida, and therefore the avodah is no good. So Ema, why don't we say like this? Mazar, if we're going to mamash compare them, let's compare them all the way. And say, just like a zar, non-kohen does the avodah b'misa, so the punishment is that he gets misa b'di shemayim, so have yoshev b'misa. Apparently, we want to also say the same thing by a zar. So Alama Tanya, but then why did we learn elsewhere? It says, aval but, an orel, oinen, yoshev, and b'misa, elbaz hara. That when it comes to someone who is an oral, an oinen, and let's just focus on the last one, a yoshev, there's no death penalty. It's an azhara, right? It's a lav. Obviously, it's something we're not supposed to do. So the question is, l'chayr we see beferish that a yoshev is not b'misa. But why do we say that? L'chayr we should say that if we're comparing a yoshev to a zar, so just like a zar is b'misa, that's undisputed. So that we should say the same thing about a yoshev. But we see clearly he's not. Again, he's not allowed to. He's not chay misa. My answer is mishum dahavi mechusar begadim u'shelo rachotz yadayim v'raglayim shniksum b'in ke'achad. So when it comes to mechusar begadim, which is like a zar, and also someone who doesn't wash their hands before, so we actually learned from a mamatzinu by a zar that the avodah is not good, and they're chay misa, so that's how it is. But we know based on a mamatzinu, you can learn out one to everything else. But why does the Torah need to mention two things? It must be as Chav Daled Amud Aleph, v'chol shnei ksumim ke'echad ein mulamdin. So therefore, we already have these two cases that the Torah specifically says is b'misa, and therefore it's going to be coming to exclude a yoshev who will not be b'misa. So Uman Yomer mulamdin. Now there is an opinion that says shnei ksumim ke'echad mulamdin. It's not until you have three that in mulamdin. So shisui yayin havile shlishi. So when it comes to someone who is just a suyayin, so he's also chay misa, and therefore now we're up to three, and therefore certainly when it comes to the yoshev, he is not going to be chay misa. Okay, he's still not allowed to, but he's not going to be chay misa. Okay, maybe with this there's a question. Yeah, question 2. So this is just straight up from what we just read: an oral, an oinen, and a yoshev. So an oral, an oinen, and a yoshev. those three individuals, there will not be b'misa. Okay, so that is that. Okay, not sure how to remember those three. Just hopefully you should remember those three. Okay, TA. TA4, there's no questions on this. TB4, we do have this. It's the same question as question 2. So let's just mark this down. Chav Gimel Mem Beis. Elu me'avodos kasheros. Oh, we didn't complete this. We didn't do this yet. Rav Shimon B'Smol. Okay, so we talk about the left hand. We have to be a little bit patient. We'll have to wait till tomorrow. Adkan.